Welcome to part 3 of our dramatic beauty portrait tutorial. In this part of the tutorial, we're going to look at basic skin retouching. And I want to get into kind of the theory of this portion of the retouch before we jump into actually doing it. I usually use the healing brush for most of this, but what I really want to get across to you guys is that if you're following the workflow, so you're going through this tutorial in all of its steps, then you probably don't want to actually do too much at this juncture. You're probably going to wind up doing less than you actually think you would do at this point. If, for instance, you're just watching this video for easy skin retouching, then you may attempt to push a little bit further using some of these other tools, maybe using your patch, your spot heal, as well as your healing brush. But let's zoom in and let's take a look at what we actually want to address at this point. So I'm just going to grab my healing brush and go to my heal layer for a second. And so what I'm trying to target are smaller blemishes. So anything that is small, anything that has, say, a color difference. So if there's like a little speck, if you find a random little red speck, this little black dot, things like that, that's what I want to address at this point. Just basic skin retouching. So little dot here. Any very small thin hairs, I may be able to heal that out. Little speck here, these little white highlights, little dots. Possibly healing out this. This is kind of on the border of where I might not heal it and try to dodge it. Can maybe heal this line out here. Let's look at our other image as well. And we can see, so things like this blemish right here, this is something I would not heal, at least not at this point. Because what's going on here are two things. One, there is some texture issues, but there's also value. So there's a slightly darker portion here, a slightly lighter portion here. And so I would save this for my negative dodge and burn step, which will be next. See what it looks like after I've made this a little bit darker, made this a little bit lighter, and then I would address the texture either through healing or through frequency separation. Another thing that I like to do at this point is take care of these small little hairs. So in this image, we don't really have that problem, but in this one we do. So I like to address that here if I can. If I run into any little problem areas, then I'll leave it and attempt to do it with a different step, possibly through frequency separation if I need to. Some things will remove really easily at this portion, and then you'll wind up with just some random difficult hair. So these little hairs here, I will try to remove with my healing brush. So little dots, possibly some of these little fuzzies. Although I don't really need to go overboard with these. Sometimes you can wind up doing too much and it looks worse than if you would have just left it alone. So any kind of small, like these very thin hairs, okay, I can get those. Little bumps, I'll leave this alone. All right, this is a larger texture issue that would serve better with frequency separation. Right, so this I would not address. I would probably burn this highlight down, dodge this a tiny bit, and then see what it looks like. After I do that, it probably won't need any sort of adjustment. So thin hairs, small highlight hairs here, you can see on the forehead. Those are things that I'm trying to focus on at this point. This is really just your starting point. You're doing your quick cleanup before you get into what I think is the biggest step of the retouch, which is the negative dodge and burn. Before I get into my process of healing, I want to show you guys what your options are. So I'm going to go over to my toolbar and I'm going to click and hold down on my healing brush. Now in Photoshop, whenever you have a small arrow at the bottom right of a tool, if you click and hold that down, you're going to have a menu that opens up and you have more options. So we'll look at the patch tool and the spot healing brush, as well as my go-to, the healing brush. Now the patch tool is good for larger areas. So if you had a large patch of texture, maybe if you were working on the background and you had some things going on and you didn't want to brush everything out, you could possibly use the patch tool. Now you will need to actually have a layer for it to sample. You won't be able to do a current and below. So for instance, let's say I saw this as a texture issue, then I could grab that area, and that's probably more than I need, and then I could try to find a similar area of texture that I want to replace it with. Okay, so we'll just go here and see how that looks. It does not look good. You can see that, so I'll undo it. But that's the idea, is that you can find small areas. So we can maybe try this if we want to patch this out. Okay, I think that looks okay, not great. I probably would not settle for that, but you can see that it does address that. So it really depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a portrait and you're trying to save time and you just want to spot heal and patch, and this is your major step, then maybe you would use more patching, because when you zoom out, this isn't going to be a big issue. Right, it does correct that. What I'm looking at is that some of the texture isn't really lining up perfectly. I'm not completely satisfied with it, but it definitely is an improvement if you want to go that route. So that's what the patch tool does. You can select an area and then try to find the new texture that you want to replace it with. Okay, keep in mind that I have this as source. If I do it as destination, it's going to do the opposite. It's going to pull the texture over. So if I switch into destination and I want some texture to replace this, well, I'll actually select the good texture, and then I'll be able to bring that over to where I want to cover that up. So you can see before and after. And it does correct the problem. I just feel like I don't have as much control as I ordinarily would. Okay, and now let's look at spot healing. So I'll click and hold this down, select my spot healing tool. So the spot healing and the healing brush, as the names would imply, are very similar. The difference is that the healing brush mandates that you select your the spot that you want to sample, so your sample point. So for instance, I have to hold down Option with the healing brush, click the area that I like, and then paint that texture in. Okay, and you can see that it does correct that little blemish right there. So I would Option click to source and then paint in. Okay, the spot healing brush does not require you, as a matter of fact, it won't allow you to sample your source. It's going to do the calculations for you. So if you want to go quicker, sample all layers would help. All right, so if you want to go quicker and you're trying to save time and you're not as concerned and maybe you trust Photoshop, then you can do this. Also want to note that I have a hard brush. I'm at 100%. I think when you are doing this, you want to be somewhere between 90 to 100%. And you also want to adjust your brush to the size that you're working on. You don't want a giant brush for a little tiny blemish. It's going to try to change the whole thing, and you can clearly see that that is terrible. It's stripped out a whole bunch of texture that we don't want to. So let's undo that and zoom back out. So if you're trying to save time, and if you trust Photoshop, then you can use this, and you're just kind of quickly going through and finding little texture areas that you see as problematic and addressing those. Okay, but again, Photoshop's doing some guesswork for you. It's looking at the area around it and deciding what it should choose. I will tell you guys that my brush is too big for that hair. So let's try that again. Give Photoshop a fighting chance. Okay, and then you can see this is a perfect example where it's not working because we have this texture here and texture here, and as we cross through where that hair was, we can see that this is it's ripped out that texture and it looks flat and doesn't look good. So you can see where spot healing can save you time theoretically because it'll help you with some of this stuff where you don't have to sample your point, but then also it may cause you problems and then you'll lose time in the long run depending on what you're doing. Let's see how it does with this eye. Okay, so not bad, right? Now let's go ahead and I'm going to get rid of these layers and just show you guys what I normally do, which is the healing brush. And so click, hold down, select my healing brush. Again, just some tips here. My hardness is going to be between 90 and 100%. I'm constantly changing my brush size so that I'm not affecting an area larger than I need to. I'm set to current and below, and I'm also on a blank layer. That way nothing is permanent, and I'm only trying to affect smaller areas. So smaller hairs, I can get away with doing that. Smaller blemishes. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and fast forward and take care of this, some of the skin issues, and then we'll take a look at the hairs as well. Okay, so that just about does it for my healing step. For my basic skin retouching, that's about as much as I'm going to do. And if we turn this on and off, especially from a zoomed out vantage point, really don't see that much of a difference. I'm not trying to retouch the entire image at this phase. I'm just going through and finding little problem areas that I can address now before I get too deep into my retouch. I want to preach restraint. Again, if it's between doing too much or not enough, at this stage, I'd rather do not enough as opposed to going too far and ruining some texture that I might have to go back and replace or correct or just mess up that part of my image. Now, the last thing I do want to take a look at are these small little hairs. Quickly before I do that, something I didn't mention is my helper box here, or my helper folder. And what's going on here is I have a set of layers that I like to use, curves, black and white, and brightness and contrast. And that just helps me see. I'll turn that on and off, as you guys probably saw as I was working. So there's certain things I'll be able to see without my helper layer, and there's certain things that with my helper layer it'll help me see. So what's going on here is that black and white, I'm not doing anything here. Okay, so I don't want to change the color values. It can skew some of the things that you're seeing. My curves layer is just making things a little bit darker. And my brightness and contrast layer is just adding a little bit of contrast. So this is just helping me see some areas that I might not ordinarily be able to see. So I'll turn that off. Go back into my heel and look at these little hairs under the lip. Okay, so the key here is that if I just grab an area of, let's say, there's no texture here, I don't have a little hair, and I paint, I can get weird things like that. So that actually did not get better. The hair is gone, but now we have this kind of random dark part here. The key is to source from the edge. So where I have this change in information, value, and texture, like the lip, I actually want to source from the top there, go to where the edge of that lip would be, and click down, and it's going to do a slightly better job. Right, so let's try this guy over here, from the edge of the lip and out. Okay, so that's kind of the tip there, is that you want to go from, whenever you're doing, say, hair, like from a hairline, you want to start from the hairline and click and drag out. It's not always going to be perfect. You've probably already seen that a couple of these were not good. And so you'll have to be patient and not settle for a bad source point. You might have to go back and redo. So Command Z will be your friend at this point. Again, don't settle for bad information. This is a really easy way of messing up your retouch. I'd rather it be how it was than to create bad texture. Alright, so I still have a little bit more work to do with the small hairs, but that just about concludes this portion of our dramatic beauty retouch. The next video will be our negative dodge and burn, which in my opinion is the most essential step to a good beauty retouch.